The Quad Summit in Tokyo. We're getting in live images of the four world leaders standing together there. The meet has ended, a 2-hour-long summit between the world leaders of India, Japan, Australia and the United States.
We're driven to make the world around us better.
Australia, India, Japan and the United States are betting on the next generation of leaders.
To strengthen our ties and our commitment to a future that leads in science and technology from societies that are open, inclusive, and free.
When we come together across nations to advance innovation and exchange cultural opportunities, we engineer unlimited possibilities.
それでは岸田内閣総理大臣によるご発言いただきます。Now the Prime Minister Kishida will deliver his statement. 総理お願いいたします。
本日、ここに、東京にて、バイデン大統領、そしてモディ首相、そしてアルバニージ首相を、お迎えし、日米豪印フェローシップを創設することを正式に宣言できますことを大変嬉しく思います。
I am delighted today to be here in Tokyo and officially declare the launch of the Quad Fellowship with President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, and Prime Minister Albanese.
豊かな社会の基盤は人間の英知です。4カ国の未来を担う若い学生や研究者の皆さんにこの魅力あふれるフェローシップにぜひ挑戦していただきたいと思っています。
Wisdom of humanity is the foundation of a prosperous and enlightening society. Allow me to call on young students and researchers who will carry forward our hope for the future of our four nations to apply for this challenging but truly fascinating fellowship program.
本フェローシップが4カ国をつなぐ架け橋となり、インド太平洋地域や世界の課題を解決し、そして成長に導く力となることを大いに期待しています。
Let me conclude by wishing that this fellowship will become a bridge that connects our four nations and that it will empower us to lead and to grow so that we can resolve many of the challenges of the Indo-Pacific region and around the world.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。では本フェローシップの運営団体であります総理ありがとうございました。では本フェローシップの運営団体でありますシュミット財団のブレイバーマン CEO にも入りいただき記念 CEO of Schmidt Features which administer the fellowship 写真のカメラにお持ちください。Please look at photographers.
Mr. President, is the policy of strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan dead?
No.
Could you explain?
No.
Mr. President, would you send troops to Taiwan if China invaded?
Our policy has not changed at all. I stated that when I made my statement yesterday.
Mr. President, you said that you would intervene militarily to defend Taiwan, though.
すみません、以上をもちまして日米豪印フェローシップ創設記念行事を終了いたします。岸田総理、アルバニージ首相、モディ首相、バイデン大統領、ご出席の皆様ありがとうございました。We would like to conclude this ceremony. Thank you, Prime Minister Kishida, Prime Minister Albanese, Prime Minister Modi, and President Biden for the President here. Now the leaders will leave the venue. では、首脳の皆様が開始いたします。Press people, please stay here. プレスの皆さん、そのまま、今の位置にとどまりください。
No.
Brief statement there by the Japanese Prime Minister highlighting what are the takeaways, the decisions and the discussions that were held between the world leaders for the last 2 hours. A brief media interaction there. There was one question that was asked to the US President with regards to the statement, the big statement that was made by America yesterday on Taiwan, to which the porters responded saying that whatever he said yesterday is in fact the statement that the United States stands at. But these particular images is something that the world will be watching because of the fact that you have 4 tall world leaders standing together there, sending out a resounding message of unity, a resounding message of an alliance that no doubt will have China very. Before this as well, every single time the Quad has held such a summit, whether in person or virtual, the biggest message has perhaps been to China. They've never really mentioned China, never mentioned Beijing. This time, no different. There's been no mention of China per se. But every time they stand together on one platform, it's very clear what the messaging is all about. And that's why China, Beijing, has always been extremely wary of this particular alliance and these 4 world leaders standing together on one stage. Geeta Mohan, our Foreign Affairs editor, is joining us with more details on this. Geeta, if you could just sum up for us the big takeaways of that Quad meet that just ended.
Well, it's a significant meeting because there are many areas that the leadership looked into. One of the most important being maritime domain awareness, maritime security, and they have been emphasizing and re-emphasizing the fact that the Indo-Pacific theater has to be open, inclusive and free, which is what the focus was. But that's not the only focus of the Quad. There is an entire economic sphere in the supply chain resilience that was discussed in the past meetings as well, and was a part of the agenda in this meeting as well. Climate is an important aspect that also was focused, has been a major focus given the island nations that are part of the Indo-Pacific and rely on, look at the Quad leaders and Quad countries. We are also looking at cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, which is data, technology. All of that was part of the agenda of the Quad summit, and the leadership certainly discussing ways forward to make a system that's resilient, a supply chain that's resilient and not dependent on one country alone. The leadership understood the importance of a strong supply chain and resilience in the supply chain after COVID. And of course, then there was this entire conversation about COVID-19 and the COVID vaccines, vaccine equality, and allowing these Quad leaders to have enough vaccines to send to other countries that are still in dire need. So all that part of the Quad summit, we await the final communique of this meeting. But the last communique, in the last communique itself, if you compare, one realizes that the focus has not shifted, but looking at a stronger Indo-Pacific theater for these critical nations.
Okay, let's decode that further with Paulami Saha. She's joining us live from Tokyo. Paulami, we just saw the Quad summit ending with a brief statement also from the Japanese Prime Minister. Geeta has summed up for us some of the issues, the sectors, the topics that were touched upon: maritime security, education, post-COVID cooperation, all of that being brought up.
Absolutely. These are going to be some of the key issues that would have been discussed in that summit, which lasted about 2 hours. Shortly, you will be, of course, hearing of the launch of the Quad Fellowship, which is basically a fellowship to, in fact, sponsor 100 students from America, from Australia, from India, from Japan, in order to go and study in the United States of America in certain specific sectors, only be it technology, be it engineering. These are some of the sectors. There are 4 sectors where scholarships will be, fellowships to be precise, will be provided to students hailing from these 4 Quad countries to study in the United States. That will be launched in a short while from now, post which there will be a lunch which will be hosted by Prime Minister Kishida. Of course, the Quad summit is extremely critical, especially because it comes at a time, as has been stated by the US President in his opening remarks, very elaborately, when, of course, Russia has invaded Ukraine. Remember, there has already been a virtual conference of the Quad leaders in March at a time when this invasion was already underway. Russia had invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February. So this was, in fact, discussed. But given the opening remarks which have been made by US President Joe Biden, you get a sense of what he is going to emphasize on as he, of course, goes into that meeting. That summit, of course, now has concluded. Of course, about post-COVID cooperation, we have been telling our viewers as to how this grouping of 4 nations has been re-energized in the post-COVID world. This has been a grouping which has existed for a very, very long time, but not much happened in terms of the top leadership, the heads of state having met before. It was mostly the foreign ministers and other officials from the foreign ministries of the 2 countries who, in fact, coordinated. It's only in the post-COVID world, in fact, that these leaders have started meeting in 2021, the first virtual conference in March, and then subsequently the in-person meeting, the first in-person meeting in Washington, D.C. in September 2021. Then the virtual conference again in March 2022, followed by another in-person meeting in Tokyo. Post-COVID cooperation, infrastructure development, cybersecurity, maritime security, also, technology as to how they will, in fact, collaborate in areas of data and technology as well. These are going to be some of the key features of the Quad. This is not a military grouping. This is not a grouping of, nations that are, like I said, a military grouping. So this is not going to be entirely the focus. But yes, slowly we've seen that this grouping wants to increase the scope of it, wants to increase the possibilities that can emerge as a result of these 4 nations having come together. And that is going to be very interesting to see how they, of course, respond to the challenge of China's growing aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. That is something which will be, in fact, possibly communicated in the joint statement that is released, not naming China per se, because that has not been exactly the protocol that is followed, but clearly hinting at China's growing belligerence in the region. That is going to be something which is definitely going to be focused upon, as China already has hinted when Foreign Minister Wang Yi yesterday, in fact, released a statement and said this Indo-Pacific strategy is, in fact, inciting confrontation and is undermining peace in the region and will only be a failed strategy, thereby almost suggesting that China is feeling quite worried, quite threatened by this grouping.
That picture, the bonhomie that you see on your screens right now, the pictures of all of these world leaders together, all smiles, standing on one stage, is message enough for China. There's going to be no mention of Beijing, of China in the detailed statement, so don't expect that. But this by itself, the optics of this entire meet, Polemy, by itself is a very, very strong message to China.
Oh, absolutely. These are 4 of the world's most powerful democracies that have come together. So the optics itself send out a very strong message, Akshita, as you point out. That is going to be extremely significant. You've seen the bonhomie, you've seen the little chat that happened.
Apologies. Looks like we've lost that connection with Polemy. We'll reconnect with her. She's been getting us all the latest updates from Tokyo on what's really playing out right now on day 2 of Prime Minister Modi's visit there to Tokyo. The Quad summit has just come to an end. Those pictures on your screens are some of the highlights of Prime Minister Modi's meetings with all of these world leaders. I just want to bring in Geeta Mohan also on this. Geeta, if you could elaborate further on the point that I put across to Polemy with regards to the China factor. You did tell us earlier that Quad, every time they've met, these leaders have never made a mention, never named China. And despite that, the messaging is very, very evident for Beijing.
Well, in their own statements, we will see the mention of China. In all probability, if there is a conference, you will hear President Biden coming out very strongly against China, Australian Prime Minister coming out very strongly against China. But in the joint communique, as we see in the past one, there was no specific mention, but all the areas that were covered spoke of aggression, belligerence, how to counter it, resilient supply chain. So the references were to the country in question without naming the country. But in the press conferences, you will hear a lot in terms of how China needs to be contained, Chinese aggression has to be contained, and that's the road and that's the way that all these countries are taking in order to ensure free, inclusive Indo-Pacific. And that certainly has been the agenda of the Quad. We will be looking at the launch of the Quad Fellowship, like Paulomi just elaborated, of 100 students who will be allowed to then go and study from all these 4 countries, who would be then will be studying in the United States of America. But Akshita, it's the post-Quad summit meetings that are also of significance. In some time from now, we will be seeing the bilaterals begin. The first bilateral will be between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden, followed by the bilateral with the Australian Premier, the first meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the new Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Albanese.
Okay.
He is also going to meet with the opposition leader, former Prime Minister Suga, and then the bilateral meeting with Japanese Prime Minister. So the agenda on the table for all these various meetings are going to be very different from the Quad-specific agenda.
Definitely, and that's something we'll track very, very closely. The bilaterals, the one-on-ones, and the big takeaways from those meetings as well. Geeta, Paulomi, thank you very much for joining us on this broadcast and getting us all the details of the Prime Minister's Day 2 in